Today, on the walls of the abandoned complex that came to symbolize the oppression Egyptians endured under the previous regime, a simple message left behind by the protesters. This is the fate of the oppressors. Ayman Muhyiddin, AlJazeera, Nasser City.
So what's the history behind Egypt's infamous state security service? Well, Egypt was the first Arab state to establish a security service in 1913 under British mandate. It still exists to this day. The Internal Security Service has been accused of some of the worst human rights abuses in order to suppress dissent against Hosni Mubarak's 30-year rule. It's rumoured the agency has some 500,000 staff and a large network of informants. The history of torture allegations against the agency has grown since the war on terror was launched after 9/11. The Egyptian government's been accused of turning the country into a torture centre for terror suspects and even acknowledged that since 2001, the US government transferred up to 70 detainees to Egypt under extraordinary rendition. Well, to discuss Egypt's state security agency are our guests. In Cairo, Hisham Safi Eldin, a former police officer. In Dubai, Theodore Karasik, a director of research at the Institute for Near East and Gulf Military Affairs. And also in Cairo, Hossam El Hamalawi, who's an Egyptian blogger and activist. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Hisham Safi Eldin, let me start with you, if I may. What do you know of the inner workings of the security agency, and does it deserve the allegations of torture and abuse?
Well, first I have to mention that yes, there were some torture, there are lots of abuses, and the entire sector needs to be reformed or even dissolved into a new mechanism and a new ideologies. The problem is not in the system or the state security itself, but in the whole regime, including the Ministry of Interior and the state security. State security was turned into a tool in the hand of the regime instead to be a tool in the hand of the people to protect themselves and protect their home country. So I guess, yes, it has turned to be a weapon which is pointed out to the chests of the normal citizens. Yes, this is something wrong, but I need to mention as well that there is a part of this sector which is tackling the anti-terrorism, the counter-terrorism activities, which is a noble part that we need to recognize here, which is something that relevant to the information that they have. And I'm very concerned about the disclosure of this important information. We have lots of officers that are trying to trace cells outside homelands in different parts of the globe, and they might be in a very vulnerable situation if this information was released.
All right, well, we'll come back to the reform.
But yes, I agree that lots of abuses.
OK, well, we'll come back to the possible reform of the agency a little bit later in the programme. Hossam El Hamalawi in Cairo. We've spoken to you, Hossam, many times during the revolution and afterwards. But let me ask you, why do so many ordinary Egyptians fear and hate the secret police? And how did Mubarak use the agency so successfully to enforce his rule?
Egyptians hate state security police for the very obvious reasons, which some of them were mentioned actually by your guest, who's a former police officer, which is state security was a weapon of the Mubarak's dictatorship. State security rested its essence on the use of torture, systematic torture, not just some rotten apples and police officers, in order to quell and silence dissent of any sort in our society. State security officers acted with impunity whenever it came to anything they wanted to do, whether it's torturing citizens, whether it's seizing property from citizens, whether it's also imposing taxes and royalties and money using thuggery on Egyptian citizens. So no wonder it was widely hated.
Hossam, let me just ask a second question very briefly. I mean, because in that earlier report, we saw one woman saying her email account was hacked into. I mean, you're a blogger. What sort of stories have you been hearing about what the secret police did to people, particularly with emails and phone accounts?
The National Democratic Party, together with state security police, had trained a group of their supporters basically to pose as bloggers and to pose as citizens on the internet, spamming our own accounts with comments that are pro-regime, trying to down our sites on occasions and trying to hack our Facebook pages and our Twitter accounts. But I would say largely they failed. They weren't that successful.
Theodore Karasik in Dubai. Hossam El Hamalawi seems to be saying that there was endemic abuse and corruption within the service. What's your assessment of Egypt's state security system, and why is it so loathed and hated by many ordinary Egyptians?
Well, clearly Egypt's state security service, this was functioning under basically a totalitarian rule, and it was in charge of actually trying to disrupt any part of society that would challenge the regime. I think it's important here to look at other countries that had similar regimes and what happened to their state security services. They also, for example, in the Soviet Union or maybe in Romania or countries like this, when those regimes collapsed, the state security police were actually criticized quite a bit for the old order, and that's exactly what's ongoing today in Egypt.
Hisham Safi Eldon back in Cairo. Many people say that it was state security agents that used violence to try and stop the protests in Tahrir Square. How much did Mubarak try and use the agency to help quell the rebellion, do you think?
Well, the agency is a tool like any other tool. It could be misused if it was in the wrong hands. That doesn't mean the tool itself it was a bad thing, or I can't say this, because lots of good people were there. However, yes, it was used by the regime of Mubarak in different places that they shouldn't. And I don't agree, of course, with what they were doing in this. But we are talking now about the symptoms of the problem, but not the root cause that caused this problem. I mean, we have to make it straight that the emergency law, only the emergency law, give them a free hand to go beyond limit and to do things that they shouldn't have even think about doing this. So this is the part that we need to think about when we talk reform. So this is a good part to start with. We need to end the emergency status. Second, the whole tool or the whole state security sector was just serving and protecting the regime. And another part of it, parallel to this, was the honest people on the regime, on the sector that was fighting the terrorism activities and extremism. We need to recognize those people. And I hear from this place calling the Supreme Council and the managerial rulers of Egypt right now to declare the innocence or the guiltness of the commanders and the leaders of the state security, just to let the other people, the innocent people, continue serving these countries. And I also wondering why it wasn't just being put under the supervision of the state, of the intelligence sector or the judicial system or even the Supreme Council. Why they didn't by day one of the revolution.
Okay.
They secure the information, and if they are following a crisis management plan, or if they are following any contingency plans, they should have thought about securing this information, because this is the information that will condemn people